Hi, I'm Leanpub from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Viktor Farcic. Based in Barcelona, Viktor is developer advocate at Upbound, a member of the CNCF Ambassadors, Google Developer Experts, CDF Ambassadors, and GitHub Stars groups, and a published author. You can follow him on Twitter at @vfarcic, and read his blog at technologyconversations.com, and check out his popular YouTube channels, DevOps Toolkit and DevOps Paradox. Viktor's the author of the book Crossplane, the Cloud-Native Control Plane. In the book, Viktor shows you how you can create for people in your company a platform that would provide the same experience they have when working with AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, or any public cloud provider. In this interview, we're going to talk about what Viktor's been up to since he was last on the podcast, his book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his work as an author and content creator. So thank you very much, Viktor, for being on the Leanpub Front Matter podcast again.
Thank you for having me.
So as I mentioned, you were on the podcast before. It was way back in 2018, pre-pandemic, all that kind of stuff. So I was wondering if you could just catch us up on what you've been up to in the last 4.5 years.
Well, I don't know, to be honest. I tend to change a lot of what I do and how I do it. I get bored quickly. But most of the time in those years was spent one way or another working on public projects, mostly open source. I was switching from one company to another, but what is common is that I'm very much into open source, right? And that can mean many different things. That can mean directly contributing or helping people or creating content for people, speaking at conferences. So many different ways, or methods. But what ties it all together is probably that public-facing open source involvement.
That's very interesting, actually. The public-facing part of it. When was the last time you spoke at a conference?
It's been already 3 or 4 months, mostly because somewhere after November, I chose to take a break. Okay. Normally, I speak in I give maybe 15 talks a year or something like that. I was on a break, but now starting from next week, I'm back. That would be KubeCon in Paris.
And I guess this is sort of like a bit almost kind of like old-fashioned now. But when the pandemic hit, did you suddenly become a sort of expert in virtual kind of conference presentation talks and things like that?
I did a couple of virtual conferences, but stopped fairly quickly. I don't like it, to be honest. I don't see the point in virtual conferences, to be honest, because it's, if people want to watch something online, I feel that they want to watch it on their own terms, when they have time, when they're not busy with something else. And to me, the value of conferences in person is that communication, that meeting people, speaking with them, exchanging knowledge, and so on and so forth. And I don't think that that's happening in online conferences, right? Usually people come, they speak, somebody listens to them, or probably listens to them while they're working on something important in a background and things like that. So I'm not very fond of virtual conferences, to be honest. I feel that when you're physically in a conference, then you can say, hey, actually, I took a plane, I landed in this place, I reserved those 3 days for this. While you're in the office or home, it's just happening in the background. You're not stopping work usually.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We had a book created by someone whose whole job was conferences for HashiCorp, and she and her co-author created a book called Digital First Events, which was their experience of like suddenly going, oh shit, we're gonna try and create something that's like a conference, but with the knowledge that there's no way that you can actually recreate any of the things that you just described. And they worked hard to kind of do what they could, but there was no getting away from the fact that like it's not the same when you're standing or sitting in your living room as opposed to actually really being at a conference.
Exactly. I mean that's I feel big part of the problem, but there is also the thing that when you change a medium, when you change something, you cannot just apply the same principles to the new medium. I feel that everybody was trying to make to use the same experience and the same methods, just now it's online, right? And if you change the medium, you need to adapt to that medium, right? I've seen many organizers even say, oh, there is a graphical representation of views or the rooms where you are. No, this is something completely different. And once we figure out that this is something completely different, then it will probably become interesting, but it's not the same as a conference. I think that's the biggest mistake people are making.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that exact same example, that there were some sort of, and people trying things and good for them and stuff like that. But the idea that like you've got a little avatar on the screen and you can move it around into different rooms and see who else is in the room and stuff like that. And it's like, I don't know, it reminds me of the ebook apps that had like a page turn or something like that on them. It's like, like, oh, there's a term for it that I'm forgetting right now, but a design term for that. But, it takes some time to transition and things like that, from one medium to another. And we do try and bring things along, but learning how to do them differently in a way that's appropriate to the medium is really important. And actually, it is interesting. One thing that they found in writing in their book, Digital First Events, was that recreating like what people do in the kind of in-between moments, of which there are many at conferences, was just kind of an interesting thing that they tried to do. But then if I'm recalling correctly from the interview that I did with the author, then they realized that they were in the TV business, and that they needed
exactly
their model should be television, instead of like recreating a conference. And so you were working on lots of open source stuff, and currently you are now at Upbound. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, we'll get into it, but what Upbound does.
So Upbound is trying to redesign the experience of managing resources. And this is very vague because, when you say resources, it can be anything, but it is actually about anything. Probably the easiest way to explain it would be to bring to people the experience of using control planes, which is conceptually the same thing as what is powering big guys like AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, and so on and so forth. What they have in the background, what people don't see usually when they use their services, is what we are trying to accomplish, but not reserved only for those three, but for everybody, right? So it's in a way creating similar, if not the same experience that people have using AWS for your internal developers, with the consoles, APIs, and so on and so forth. Being able to create services for internal usage.
I'm really interested in talking to you about this because you're such an expert, and it's kind of like talking about like the natural gas network or the electricity network or something like that. Like actually, like the things that you're talking about are actually underlying like everything we're doing right now, and so many things in our lives. But we actually and we think we know how the electricity network works because we can turn on and off light switches and things like that. And we kind of trick ourselves into thinking we kind of know how the internet works or the web works because we can turn on our computer and we can go to websites and stuff like that. But actually, how it's all really working is very interesting and complicated, and there's sort of like big guys. And now what's different though is that no one will ever create a competing set of water pipes to your house and let you choose which pipes you want to use. But when it comes to sort of cloud services, there's definitely more than one. There's big guys, and then there's other things you can do, like like what you guys are working on. So, like I was just sort of like taking a step back. If I were to ask you, like, and I'm sure you probably get asked this at Thanksgiving or something like that, what is the cloud?
Oh, this is where I differ from most people. I actually, or what I was explaining before when I said big guys, I call them hyperscalers. And cloud is essentially service that you consume that is created and managed by somebody else, right? If you use GitHub, you're using a cloud service. If you're using Gmail, you're using a cloud service. If you're using AWS, it's also a cloud service. So cloud is basically anything that you consume that is managed by somebody else, somebody outside of your organization, right? Not necessarily even outside your organization, right? Right now, we are speaking in Zoom. That's a service. That's a cloud service, right? So it's almost everybody is using cloud services, and almost everybody is multi-cloud. And within that category, we have many subcategories, and one of those would be what I call hyperscalers, right? Those would be the massively big AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and maybe Alibaba. Maybe there are maybe a few more, and that's it, right? They're a special category of cloud services, but cloud service is anything managed by somebody else,
right? And we're talking about data basically being managed largely, I think.
Not necessarily only data, networking and compute as well, right?
Right.
You might be deploying your application to, let's say, Fly.io, and I'm using that just as an example, right? Saying, hey, I want to run my application. I'm using your cloud service, and you're giving me not only data, which you can, but also you're giving me compute, you're giving me networking, you're giving me storage. I probably don't even know that you're giving me all those things, because that's that electricity example. I see the switch, right? I press the switch, and a light bulb turns on, right? Now, behind all that, there's a lot of things, right? Most of those you don't even see, but it's there.
And of those things we don't see, one of them is the control plane, which I believe you've already mentioned. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what a control plane is, let's say to someone who's like not a programmer.
So control plane would be a machinery of sorts, not physical machinery, but machinery of sorts that is trying to figure out how to fulfill your requests, right? You say, I want a database, right? Traditionally, in the past, I want a database would be, okay, I go to this server, I do this, I go to there, I need to know where I'm going and what I'm doing, and so on and so forth. The goal of control plane is to figure it out. You just say, hey, give me a database, and it figures out, oh, it should be running in this server that happens to be in East Coast US, right? It's not my concern to figure it out. Control plane is handling, and I'm going to connect it with this networking, and I'm going to give this storage, and it should be that type of storage, because even though you didn't ask it explicitly, that's what works well with that, and so on and so forth. So it's almost like imagine an army of operators. When you open a ticket, and say, I want a database, and they scramble around, they figure out, okay, I need this, I need that, I need this, I need that, I should put this over here, and so on and so forth. It's like gremlins working for you.
Yeah, that reminds me, there was a book I read years ago, I think it was called The Third Culture, in which it was sort of a bunch of famous kind of scientists and technologists were contributing to this book. And one of them referred to the computer as millions of tiny slaves, which was a pointed example, of saying that like you're in control of a lot of work that's being done. And what you're talking about is, I mean, in the description of the book, you talk about abstracting all the unavoidable complexity and things like that. So having all this work that's being done for you that you don't even really need to know how it's being done or what's being done.
Precisely. That's why, in a way, I compared it with AWS, Azure, Google, but that's not really it, right? All those services that you're using today, they're relatively low level, right? And that's for a good reason, because they serve thousands, millions of users, right? And they need to be very low level so that you can assemble those. So imagine AWS, if I would go back to one of the analogies you made about computer, right? They're not giving you a computer, because if they would give you a computer, that would be a computer that happens to work for everybody, which is not the case. But they give you all the pieces you need. Like you can get memory, you can get disk drive, you can get GPU, you can get chassis for the tower for the computer, everything, right? So they're not in a business of selling you computers as analogy, but computer parts. Now you have very experienced people in your company who know how to assemble those parts. And typically you would say, hey, I need a computer. And they would ask you a couple of questions, like what type of computer, for this or for that. And then a couple of days later, you would get it because they would assemble it, right? Now, where we are moving now is instead of people assembling that computer, and I'm still using analogy, we're not really into computers, is if they can expose that as a service and say, okay, you know what? Even though in the world there are thousands of different models that people use, and that's why no vendor can provide it. Within our company, we have 15 different types of requirements. Let's create 15 different services so that people just click a button and then that something automatically appears. Like there are, I don't know, infinite number of ways how you can assemble a database in AWS. And that's very complicated because you need to have special experience and knowledge to do that, because those infinite number of ways are made to cater everybody. But within your company, developers are not going to spend 10 years trying to figure it out, because that's not their main job. That's not what they're focused. But they have a need to have a database, and you can offer it for them and say, okay, in our company we use Postgres and MySQL, and it can be a small database or a big database. You have a limited number of variations. So the idea is to be able to abstract those abstractions, those low-level abstractions, abstract them on a higher level and say, this is a catalog of things you can do, and instead of you opening an issue and telling me to do it for you, I have better things to do in my life. I can enable you to do it yourself.
So just getting into the details of it. So for example, we talk about a company. What kind of company would use Crossplane?
Any company so there are two answers to that. A company that wants to enable them, there are many different types actually, but the most common case is where a company wants to enable developers or software engineers to be self-sufficient, right? Not to ask instead of asking some other team to help them out with something, defining an application in production or database or cluster, to enable those people who do that normally to create services, enable developers to be self-sufficient and say, hey, I just write these 10 lines of YAML, or I click this button, or I do this or that, and I get it. And we both benefit, right? Because me as a person who was doing that for them can stop spending time doing it over and over and over again. And you as a developer, let's say, you don't have to wait for me, right? Just as a good a silly example would be, right now, how we do it typically is, imagine that I change the subject and say shopping, right? And you go to Amazon and say, I want to buy those shoes. And then somebody in Amazon would come back to you and ask what type of shoes, call you on the phone, and you say like this, and then you would go back and forth, and finally, no. You have a catalog of shoes in Amazon.com, you pick one, and it automatically appears next day or whenever at your doorstep, right? That simplifies the business of Amazon itself, and you get a better service. The same thing with developers, right? Why would they wait for somebody, and why would they not be in control? And that being in control is the key word there, right? Because the only way how you can be in control of something is if the abstraction is at the right level of what you need. Like when I do shopping on Amazon, I'm in control because I can choose slow or fast shipping, and I can choose what I want. If you give me too much control, if you give me control like, hey, Viktor, you can choose whether it should be shipped by train or a plane, or should it be go through this, should Joe come and deliver it to you, or Michael? It's too much control of the things I don't care about. So it would fail as well, right? So it's about finding that balance of what matters to you as a consumer, and not giving you more, but not giving you less. If that makes sense, right? That's the only way how I can make you be autonomous, right? If I give you too much, you don't know what to do. If I go give you too little, kind of, oh, you cannot choose the type, the model of the shoes you're gonna buy, right? That's me giving you too little. Then it doesn't work either, right?
Yeah, it's very actually, that's a very good analogy, but my mind is going in lots of different directions. But partly because of an experience I had recently with an Amazon order from Shein, the Chinese company. And it was I won't go into it. It was very funny. It ended up with me going on to an adventure to a part of town I'd never been to, into a parking lot where a bunch of people had like opened up their trunks. Actually, I'm going to tell that story. So basically, the message was so I got a note. So the person who sent me the package put the wrong address on there. They put the wrong apartment number in it. So I didn't get the notification that the paper notification that the package had not been delivered, but someone put it in the foyer of my apartment building. But I got a text, and I called the number, and I got a message. I sort of got a message saying, basically, like I had to go through one or two steps, right? Someone had set up some steps where you press 1 for this, press 2 for that, press 3 for that. And I got to a message that said, we can't schedule a call back because you're calling from a kind of private number or something like that. And then I don't know if you remember those old Pink Panther movies, where it was Inspector Clouseau. So in Canada, typically you have a requirement to have messages in English and in French. So the message was in English. We're sorry. It appears you are calling from a private number. We can't schedule a callback. And then in a Clouseau-esque French accent, it said again in English, we are sorry to see that we cannot arrange a callback. And so it was very, very funny. I called it back again just to confirm that that's what I'd done. So clearly someone somewhere, probably in China, had said, oh, damn it, we've got it, or not damn it, or we've got this like multilingual requirement. They used a service and they said, can you please put this message in English? And then can you put it in French? And whatever service they were using, put it in a French accent. But it was very, very funny. But anyway, the reason I go through all this is to say someone somewhere was like, we want to set up a new shipping company that sort of ships items to people, or that creates fashion and stuff like that, and that ships items to people. And part of that was going to be a bunch of programmers going off and doing a bunch of work. And those programmers themselves, I mean, you as the sort of executive or manager or what have you, you have the goals that you want to achieve. But those programmers themselves have to sort of set a bunch of things up to sort of deliver the services that you're asking for. And what you're talking about is like giving those programmers, taking away from them all kinds of system networking kind of stuff that they don't want to be experts in, so that they can actually deliver whatever it is, whether it's a message in English translated from Chinese and message in French because they realize there's this regulation, or like, what are the numbers that people can, press 1 for this, press 2 for that. How do I set all that up? How do I send a text message? How do I print out a kind of like delivery notice? And like, for example, the way my adventure ended was I asked these people in this parking lot with all these parcels from their trunks of their cars, where do I go to pick up my parcel? And they no one knew until someone pointed at a shack. And I went to the shack and they cut a hole in the wall of the shack and had a button and had a note that said, bang on this bell. And I banged on a bell. And after a couple minutes, a woman appeared in the window with a little like Lenovo laptop and like typed in my 15-digit parcel number. And she went to like the kitchen in the back and got the package, which is just incredible. Anyway, the system underlying all of that was just incredible. But anyway, I'm just bringing all this up to say that that's what we're really talking about here. It's like setting up actual services in the end, but like doing all the things, the complex things you need to do, and taking away all of the kind of networking.
All the things that do not matter to you in a way, right?
Exactly.
But your story actually sounds magnificently, amazingly good, because usually those stories end up with you hanging upside down in a cabin in woods and being chopped to pieces.
I'm not joking. When I got out of the car, my girlfriend was like, "Don't die." But in any case, I just wanted to sort of bring up that, since you were using Amazon as an example and things like that, like if you are going out there to build a business, there are going to be things that you're going to be doing that probably involve hiring a bunch of programmers, and you want to take away from them the things that they shouldn't be doing.
Exactly. While still enabling them to be able to get what they want close to instantly, right? Because companies go to other extreme and say, "Hey, I'm going to remove this from you. Ask for it and you will get it maybe one day. Who knows, right?" So it's enabling people to get what they need without, I say, the right level of structure, right? But without going into the details that they're not experts in. Yeah. Because nobody's expert in everything.
Yeah, no. And that actually gives me a good segue into the next part of the interview. We were talking about the sort of book specifically, but like also how you wrote it. So you talk in your videos, tutorials about Crossplane, about how, there's different approaches that people can have to teaching you something. And you have your own approach, which isn't explain. It's do, basically.
Yeah, I like explaining what I'm doing rather than just explaining, right? Oh, let's do this. And while we are doing that, whatever that something is, we can talk about what we're doing, right? So I'm more explaining what I'm doing and hopefully people following along doing as well, right? Rather than, oh, let me spend first 4 hours of your life telling you what you will learn. And I know that some people don't like it, and I know it's not for everybody. Some people like to have an exact index, I know in advance what will happen, and a long theory, but my brain doesn't operate like that. I start doing something immediately. I do a horrible job, just to be clear, at the very beginning, but then I learn from it, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's an interesting approach, a pedagogical approach, because people can watch you. I mean, there's sort of the sort of do it live, right? People can watch you kind of get it wrong live and figure it out, what's wrong live and things like that. And so then you actually learn like sort of the kind of problem solving that we all have to engage in all the time when we're doing our work. And that's one thing I really like about that approach to teaching.
Yeah. I mean, there are two reasons. I mentioned one because simply that's how my brain operates. But the second reason why I teach like that is because I'm not good at planning, right? A long time ago, I published the book with a publisher, first and last time. And they asked me in advance, okay, first step, give me the index. And then second step number 2, give me the short description of every chapter. And I was like, I don't know, man. I'll figure it out. I don't know. It's going to happen while we're going. I don't know. I cannot. For me, it's very difficult to kind of be so methodical and plan everything in advance. When I read books, for example, I just start writing, and then it reaches the end at some point somehow.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm probably a bit more of a planner than you, but definitely, we've had this experience with Leanpub over the years where people kind of come to self-publishing because they've had that experience where they've been sort of. Some people just don't like being told what to do. I'm definitely like that. But also, people have their own approach to things, and of course, if you're a publisher, they've probably had many experiences where people are like, "Trust me, man," and then they come back a year later with nothing. And so they're like, okay, well, we need you to show us what you're actually going to do in advance. And it can be this back and forth and things like that.
I would never hire a person like me. I would never allow others to do that.
Yeah.
But now that you mentioned, that's actually one of the things I really, really like about Leanpub, because I've read very technical books and technology changes, like this book about Crossplane, right? We're going to be adding new features. And then I see books more like something that is alive. I mean, I put it to 80%, which is a random number of completeness, because I don't know when it's going to end whenever I get tired of Crossplane, right? But it allows me that mechanism that I can give it to people, and people can two important things happening. People can give me feedback and say, and that's happening, right? Oh, you made a mistake here. Excellent. No problem. Let me fix it. Publish a new version, notify people. There you go, right? I made a mistake. So what can you do? Everybody does, right? And then also to keep extending it. Oh, in Crossplane is going to, let's say 2 months from now, release a new major big feature that didn't exist there. I can edit, right? It can serve as a live, something that is alive, right?
Yeah, and actually this is all reminding me of something. So before I actually started reading the book, I watched a couple of your Crossplane videos, and I realized that the text of the book is very, very close to the sort of the script for the videos, which is a really interesting idea. But this is a relatively new thing to content creating. I mean, relatively new. People have probably been doing it for 10 or 15 years. But the idea that like very well written scripts can be both take book format and video format, with some modifications and stuff like that.
Yes,
it's very interesting. And one of the things you do in your videos, for example, is you say this is going to be a series. You'll know if there's a video after this one because it'll pop up here.
Exactly.
And like I was watching, it's like, oh, no video. I guess this is the last one so far, or something like that. But then in the book, and it's sort of a callback to what we were talking about. We're sort of doing things in different formats. You have to do them differently. In a book, you can see, well, there's 2 chapters or what have you. When you open it up, and you can do equivalent things in videos. It's just sort of very creative and interesting way of approaching that challenge of a kind of like series of doing something as it's going, not as a sort of dropping it as a complete finished thing.
Actually, big reason why that book exists is the agency that is doing editing of my videos. Because so before I was working on videos without writing anything down, script kind of. I know this. I spent sufficient amount of time with this something. I can talk about it, no problem, right? But then at one moment I realized that, okay, I'm doing too much. I need to calm down. And I started using an agency that does editing of videos. But since they know nothing about software and even less about DevOps and Kubernetes and whatever is going on there, that was a complete disaster because they did not know when to cut it. My raw material, they did not know when to put the screen recording on top of me talking and when to remove it and stuff like that. Right? So I was forced, and I was writing books before, and then I switched to videos. And then at one moment, I was forced in a way to write it down before recording so they can do this. And then somewhere around March, I thought, hey, actually, I normally do 30 hours videos. They're all self-contained, self-sufficient. But it would be a good idea, especially now with Christmas holidays coming in, people not bothering me with too many calls. Let's do something longer. Let's do, I don't know, five hours training about Crossplane. And then when I started writing the script that will have to be delivered to the editors, to the agency that does the editing and cutting and animations and everything, I realized, okay, now actually this looks like a book. It's sufficiently long. It's not like War and Peace type of long, but sufficiently long and so on and so forth. So somewhere around the end of the year, I thought, hey, well, why not actually give the same material? I mean, when I say same, similar material with not much effort in different formats. So here's a book, here's a video, choose whatever works better for you.
That's very interesting. So we've naturally gone into the last part of the interview where we talk about the person's work as an author or a content creator and things like that. And I was very interested in how this book came about, and that sort of I think I kind of guessed right. But one thing I was very curious about when I was researching for this. So for those watching or listening, since he was last on here, Viktor has these two YouTube channels that I mentioned, and probably more stuff that I didn't mention going on that he's developed. And one of your channels has 67,000 subscribers, which is, I mean, there's a lot of people, as we were talking about before we started recording, there's the Mr. Beasts of the world that you can compare yourself to. But, anybody getting started out starting out in their YouTube life would love to have 67,000 subscribers. And I noticed the really high quality of production, including the overlay of the code. So there would be like a kind of transparent overlay of the code on top of the video, which was very, very cool effect. And I was wondering, so you've partially answered my question about how you did all that by saying you hired a production company. And I was wondering at what point you mentioned that was sort of, you were running up against things, but At what point did you decide to sort of make the leap to sort of like hire a company to do some editing for you?
When I realized that it's either that or I'm gonna die.
Oh.
Because, people who are not doing it, at least not in a quality that I like, probably not aware that when you watch like half an hour, 40 minutes of my video, that's actually outside of, how much time you need to figure something out. After it's recorded and material is there, it takes at least a full day of somebody skilled in editing and animations and sound and stuff like that to assemble it. And I'm being very generous, kind of 1 day, probably longer, right? And I have a full job, right? This is not my job. That's just my hobby, right? So that would mean that probably like 3-4 days per video, because I still need to figure out what that is and so on and so forth. So I was at the point where I realized that, okay, I need to stop this, or I need to get some help from somewhere, right? And since YouTube is not my source of income, I started accepting sponsorships, which in a very, very limited quantity, just enough to cover the expenses of that agency, right? And world is a better place since then for me.
Yeah, I bet. And I'm just very curious because, we'd like to get into the sort of like weeds of this kind of thing, but like, how did you find an agency to edit your videos for you?
That was relatively easy because my brother has a graphic design agency. He's not into videos. He does do the thumbnails for me, but since he's closer to that world, he found some people recommended me, and we're working together. I don't know, maybe 2 years now, something like that.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So just through recommendations and networking,
yeah,
which is the best way to find out about things like that generally. So the last question, I don't expect you to remember this. I would think I was doing this still 4.5 years ago, but the last 5.5 years ago, the last question I always like to ask is on the podcast, if the guest is a Leanpub author, is if there was one magical feature we could build for you, or if there's still something that has you shaking your fist going, damn you, Leanpub, whenever you use Leanpub, that we could fix for you, is there anything that you can think of that you would ask us to do?
The only thing is that, so I haven't published anything for a couple of years on Leanpub. So now, half a year ago, I went back to it. The only thing that might be worth improving is that I found myself having to Google, being faster for me to Google, hey, how to create coupons. I remember that I can create coupons for people, right? And then after a minute navigating through the menu, because that's my limit for anything, I went to Google, okay, how to create coupons, right? It was easier for me to Google how to get somewhere than to get somewhere directly, right?
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. One of the things that when this is the kind of thing that people mention every once in a while. It's like, how do I find things on Leanpub? It can be sort of hard. I mean, occasionally people are mad about it. The big challenge, of course, for design on Leanpub is that there's two types of people that you're serving, and you want them both to become each other at the same time, which is readers and authors. So there's got to be a reader side of things where it's like they just want to find books and courses and buy them and take them and stuff. And then there's authors who want to create them or upload them or what have you. And so sort of building in those two dimensions is just a little bit tricky. The high level answer to that, how do I find something? Every book now has an overview page that the author can go to. And the overview page has everything on it. And if you just did like Command F on the overview page and wrote coupon, you'd find the link right away.
Okay.
And so that's part of the reason we did that. And we also we have a help center now, so that you can go there and you can search, and there's like about 1,000 articles in there. And one of the things we do now. Sorry.
I was about to say, actually, when I complain, it's not a big complaint, because every time I Google something, it always redirected me to your page to explain it, right? So you did explain it well.
Yeah, no,
most of the time when I get lost in something, now I'm not talking about Leanpub, Google takes me to some completely other source, right?
Yes.
So you did document everything, and that's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, no, thanks. And actually, one of the things that there were two things that maybe happened since you were last kind of really active on Leanpub. One is that we basically we realized we were doing a lot of stuff kind of in private, like all just on email, and it's kind of like solving the same problem 1,000 times in private is dumb. You should solve it in public, and so that's one of the reasons for we didn't invent the idea. Like we got to the world of the help center way too late, but it's very, very useful. And the other thing is, one thing we realized is as a practice is that every interaction we have with someone, basically turn it into an article or fix your design problem or something like that. Relate to every single interaction that you have with someone as like a feature you need to build, a feature you need to take away, a document, an article that you need to write, something you need to change in your design, something like that. Every interaction is something out of that other person's time. And it's probably 10 or 100 other 10x people who just walk away because they couldn't find it or something like that. So that's one of the reasons that we did all that. And thanks very much for that feedback. And thanks very much for your new book, Viktor. And thank you very much for taking some time out of your evening to talk to me and talk to our audience about your new book and what you've been up to.
Thank you for having me.